I think something is wrong with your son." The billionaire mother looked up sharply. "Excuse me." The maid swallowed hard, her hands shaking. "I clean his room every day. I help address sometimes. And today I saw marks on his back. They weren't there before." The father stood up, anger flashing in his eyes. "What kind of marks?" The maid hesitated, then whispered, "Bruises. Old ones. And new ones too." Silence filled the room. "That's impossible," the mother said, her voice breaking. "He has everything. The best doctors. The best care." The maid met her eyes, tears forming. "Then why does your son get weaker every single day? And why is someone hurting him when no one is watching?" The boy coughed softly from the bedroom, and in that moment, the maid realized the truth she had just uncovered could destroy a powerful family forever. Miriam Johnson woke before dawn every morning. She was strong, soft-spoken, and carried decades of quiet dignity in her steps. After years of cleaning hotels and offices, she had finally found a stable job as a maid for the Aldrich family, one of the richest families in the city. Their mansion was huge, cold, and filled with expensive things that looked untouched, like a museum no one lived in. But the only part of the house that felt alive was the room of 10-year-old Daniel Aldrich. Daniel was thin, pale, and often tired. He was gentle and polite, but there was always something sad in his eyes. When Miriam first met him, she thought he was just a lonely boy in a lonely mansion. But as weeks turned into months, she noticed something else. Daniel was getting weaker. His shoulders slumped more each day. His steps grew slower, and his voice softer. One morning, Miriam knocked on his door to bring fresh laundry. The room was quiet. Too quiet. Daniel was sitting at his desk, but his head was resting on his arms as if he had fallen asleep in the middle of writing. She walked closer and saw his little hand hanging down limply, almost lifeless. "Baby, you feeling all right?" she asked softly. Daniel lifted his head slowly. His eyes were heavy, like he had been awake all night. "I'm tired," he whispered. Miriam felt her chest tighten. This wasn't normal childhood tiredness. This was something deeper, something wrong. She gently touched his forehead. It wasn't hot. He didn't look sick in the usual ways. But he looked drained, like something was quietly taking the life out of him. Miriam watched him for days. Every morning, he seemed weaker. His skin grew dull. His voice lost its energy. Sometimes he barely ate. His parents barely noticed. Mr. and Mrs. Aldridge were always traveling, always leaving before sunrise and returning after dinner. They cared for Daniel, but they trusted doctors and tutors more than their own eyes. So they missed what Miriam saw. One evening, after the tutors left, Daniel sat with Miriam in the kitchen while she polished the silverware. He liked sitting with her. She made him feel safe. "You ever feel like you're disappearing?" he asked suddenly. She froze. "Why would you say that?" Daniel hesitated, staring at his hands. "Sometimes when I wake up, it feels like someone took something from me in the night. Like a piece of me is gone." Miriam stopped polishing completely. "What do you mean someone took something?" He didn't answer. Instead, he slowly rolled up his sleeve to show her his wrist. Miriam gasped. There were marks. Strange, thin, swirling lines, almost like they were drawn under the skin instead of on it. Not bruises, not scratches, not anything she had ever seen. "Where did you get these?" she whispered. "I don't know," he whispered back. Fear crawled through her. Something was happening to this child, and everyone was blind to it. But not her. Never her. That night, after the house went quiet, Miriam couldn't sleep. She paced the small servant room, replaying the strange marks in her mind. Daniel looked like those marks were stealing his strength. She had seen bruises, rashes, burns, and cuts in her life, but nothing like those thin lines that glowed faintly when a light hit them. By morning, she made a decision. She would watch Daniel's room at night. She waited until the mansion slept. The halls were dim and silent. She sat on a wooden stool near his door with a cup of strong coffee and whispered prayers. Hours passed. Then, around 2 a.m., she heard it. A soft creaking sound from inside the room. Her breath caught. She rose slowly and pressed her ear to the door. There was movement, a faint shifting of fabric, the sound of something brushing against a mattress. She knocked gently. "Daniel? You okay?" No response. She tried the doorknob. Locked. Her heart raced. Daniel never locked his door. Something wasn't right. "Mr. Daniel," she said louder. "Open the door if you can hear me." Still nothing. She pushed her shoulder against the door. Once. Twice. On the third push, the old lock snapped and the door swung open. The room was dark. Daniel lay in bed, breathing heavily, his body trembling. And standing over him was a shadow. A tall, thin shadow bending over the sleeping boy, its long fingers touching the marks on his arms. The fingers moved as if drawing patterns into his skin. Miriam screamed. The shadow vanished instantly, as if it had been made of smoke. Daniel woke with a jolt, gasping. "Miriam? What happened?" She rushed to him, her hands shaking. "You're all right, baby. I'm here now." But he wasn't all right. The marks on his arms were brighter than before, glowing faintly like veins of blue fire. His breathing was shallow, and his heartbeat fluttered beneath her fingertips like a frightened bird. She ran to the hallway and shouted for help. The home security guard came first, then the butler, then the private doctor the family kept on call. His parents were out of the country, unreachable. The doctor examined Daniel and frowned deeply. "These marks? I've never seen anything like them," he confessed. He tested Daniel's blood, checked his heart, scanned him with medical devices worth more than most houses. And still, he had no answers. "He is losing strength rapidly," the doctor said quietly. "Something is draining him." Miriam clenched her fists. She knew. She saw it. The shadow. But how could she explain that without sounding insane? She knelt beside Daniel's bed and took his hand gently. "I'm not leaving you," she whispered. "Not tonight. Not ever." Daniel's fingers squeezed hers weakly, trusting her more than anyone else in the mansion. Over the next days, the strange marks spread across Daniel's arms and back. His energy faded so quickly that he needed help getting out of bed. Doctors came and went. Specialists were flown in. None could explain the marks. None believed Miriam when she tried to describe what she saw in his room. To them, she was just a maid. To Daniel, she was the only person who didn't give up. One afternoon, when the sun cast soft golden light across his bed, Daniel whispered, "The shadow comes when I'm asleep. I feel it, like it's pulling something from me." Miriam held his hand tightly. "You're not alone. I saw it too." He stared at her in relief, as if someone finally believed him. She spent her nights by his door again, but the shadow never appeared while she was awake. It was as if it sensed her presence. So one night, she pretended to leave. She walked down the hallway loudly, making her footsteps echo. Then she slipped into the nearby linen closet, where she could see his door through a thin crack. Hours went by. Suddenly, Daniel whimpered in his sleep. The door creaked open, on its own. A cold wind blew down the hall. And then, she saw it again. The shadow glided into his room. Miriam burst out of the closet and sprinted forward. "Get away from him!" The shadow recoiled, releasing a hiss that made the lights flicker. Daniel's body convulsed, as if the shadow had been pulling something from him. Miriam grabbed the nearest lamp and swung it through the air. The lamp passed through the shadow, but it screamed, a sharp, painful sound that shook the room. The shadow vanished. Daniel opened his eyes weakly. "You saved me," he whispered. "Not yet," she said, tears in her eyes. "But I will." Miriam refused to let the shadow return. She didn't know what it was, spirit, nightmare, curse, but she knew faith, love, and strength were bigger than fear. Her grandmother used to say, "When darkness touches a child, a mother's heart becomes the brightest weapon." Miriam wasn't Daniel's mother, but she loved him like one. She dug through old boxes in her room and found the small leather pouch her grandmother had given her long ago. Inside were dried herbs, a piece of charcoal, and a tiny wooden cross. She didn't know if it would work, but she had nothing else. That night, she drew a small line of charcoal above Daniel's doorframe. Her grandmother used to say charcoal could trap wandering spirits. She placed the wooden cross under his pillow. She sat at his bedside and prayed softly until her eyes grew heavy. At 3 a.m., the whole room shook. Daniel gasped in his sleep, his back arching, the marks glowing brighter and brighter until his skin looked like it was on fire from within. Miriam jumped up. The shadow crawled from the corner of the ceiling, its limbs stretching unnaturally, its eyes glowing like cold white light. It lunged toward Daniel. Miriam stood in front of him, her voice thunderous. "You will not touch this child." The shadow slammed into her, yet she did not fall. It hissed, recoiled, then lunged again. She held up her grandmother's cross, her hands shaking. The shadow screeched, its form flickering like a dying flame. "You hear me," she shouted. "You leave this child alone." The shadow surged one last time, then disintegrated into dust like smoke that evaporated into the air. Daniel's body fell limp, exhausted but alive, and the marks slowly faded from his arms. By sunrise, Daniel's color returned. His cheeks gained warmth. His breathing steadied. For the first time in months, he slept like a normal child, with peace instead of fear. When his parents returned and learned all that had happened, they were shaken to their core. They apologized for not seeing their son's suffering, for trusting money over presents. Mr. Aldridge stood before Miriam with tears in his eyes. "How can we ever repay you?" he asked. Miriam looked at Daniel, who ran into her arms, hugging her tightly. "You don't owe me anything," she said softly. "Just love him. Be there for him." But Mr. Aldridge shook his head. "No, you saved my son. You saw what none of us did. You stayed when even experts gave up. You fought for him like he was your own." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter offering her a permanent position, not as a maid, but as Daniel's full-time caretaker, with a salary that would change her life. She accepted with grateful tears. From that day forward, Daniel blossomed. He grew stronger, happier, and braver. And Miriam remained by his side, guiding him, protecting him, loving him like the mother he never had. Every night before bed, Daniel whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." And Miriam would smile gently and reply, "A child's light is too precious. I will always see you." The mansion was no longer cold, because Miriam brought warmth with her, and Daniel's laughter filled every empty room. Their bond became unbreakable, and the shadow never returned.